Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the next thrilling and astounding, amazing, exciting, ameliorated, amicable and amenable, inimical, saturnine and taciturn, ebullient and effervescent, loquacious, castigated and ameliorated, reading cow from another world, thing, show. That this is the next chapter of the installment of we continue with the next section of the episode of the chapter of the plague story from the 100 Years War of the Decameron of Boccacio. So, without further ado, we begin. Some were of a more barbarous, though peradventure a sure way of thinking, avouching that there was no remedy against pestilences better than, no, nor any so good as, to flee before them. Wherefore, moved by this reasoning, and recking of naught but themselves, very many, both men and women, abandoned their own city, their own houses, and homes, their kinsfolk and possessions, and sought the country seats of others, or at least their own, as if the wrath of God, being moved to punish the iniquity of mankind, would not proceed to do so wheresoever they might be, but would content itself with afflicting those only who were found within the walls of their city, or as if they were persuaded that no person was to remain therein, and that its last hour was come. And albeit these who opined thus variously died not all, yet neither did they all escape. Nay, many of each way of thinking, and in every place, sickened of the plague, and languished on all sides, well nigh abandoned, having themselves, what while they were whole, set the example to those who abode in health. Think about it. Indeed, leaving be that townsman avoided townsman, and that well nigh no neighbor took thought unto other, and that kinsfolk seldom or never visited one another, and held no converse together, save from afar. This tribulation had stricken such terror to the hearts of all men and women alike, that brother forsook brother, uncle, nephew, and sister, brother, and oftentimes wife, husband. Nay, what is yet more extraordinary and well nigh incredible, fathers and mothers refused to visit or tend their very children, as they had not been theirs, by reason whereof there remained unto those, and the number of them, both males and females, was incalculable, who fell sick, none other succor than that which they owed either to the charity of friends, and of these there were few, or the greed of servants who tended them, allured by high and extravagant wage, albeit for all this these latter were not grown many, and those men and women of mean understanding, and for the most part unused to such offices, who served for well nigh naught but to reach things called for by the sick, or to note when they died. And in the doing of these services many of them perished with their gain. Of this abandonment of the sick by neighbors, kinsfolk, and friends, and of the scarcity of servants, arose an usage before well nigh unheard, to wit, that no woman, how fair or lovesome or well born soever she might be, once fallen sick, recked aught of having a man to tend her, whatever he might be, or young or old, or without any shame discover to him every part of her body, no otherwise than she would have done to a woman, but the necessity of her sickness required it, the which belike in those who recovered was the occasion of lesser modesty in time to come. Moreover, there ensued of this abandonment the death of many who peradventure, had they been succored, would have escaped alive. Wherefore, as well for the lack of the opportune services which the sick availed not to have as for the virulence of the plague. Such was the multitude of those who died in the city by day and by night, that it was an astonishment to hear tell thereof, much more to see it. And thence, as it were of necessity, there sprang up among those who abode alive things contrary to the pristine manners of the townfolk. It was then, even as we yet see it used, a custom that the kinswoman and she-neighbors of the dead should assemble in his house, and there condole with those who more clearly pertained unto him, whilst his neighbors and many other citizens foregathered with his next of kin before his house, whither, according to the dead man's quality, came the clergy, and he, with funeral pomp of chants and candles, was borne on the shoulders of his peers to the church, chosen by himself before his death, which usages, after the virulence of the plague began to increase, were either altogether or for the most part laid aside, and other and strange customs sprang up in their stead. For that, not only did folk die without having a multitude of women about them, but many there were who departed this life without witness, and few indeed were they to whom the pious plaints and bitter tears of their kinsfolk were vouchsafed. Nay, in lieu of these things there obtained for the most part laughter and jests and jibes and feasting and merrymaking in company, which usance women, laying aside womanly pitifulness, had right well learned for their own safety. Few again were they whose bodies were accompanied to the church by more than half a score or a dozen of their neighbors, and of these no worshipful and illustrious citizens, but a sort of bloodsuckers sprung up from the dregs of the people, who styled themselves pickmen, and did such offices for hire, shouldered the bier, and bore it with hurried steps, not to that church which the dead man had chosen before his death, but most times to the nearest, behind 5 or 6 priests, with little light, and whilst none at all, which latter, with the aid of the said pickmen, thrust them into what grave soever they first found unoccupied, without troubling themselves with too long or too formal a service. Get out of here! Exit! Stage right! Heavens to Murgatroyd! Okay. The condition of the common people, and belike in great part of the middle class also, was yet more pitiable to behold, for these, for the most part, retained by hope or poverty in their houses, and abiding in their own quarters, sickened by the thousand daily, and being altogether untended and unsuccoured, died well nigh all without recourse. Many breathed their last in the open street, whilst other many, for all they died in their houses, made it known to the neighbors that they were dead, rather by the stench of their rotting bodies than by otherwise. And of these and others who died, all about the whole city was full. For the most part one same usance was observed by the neighbors, moved more by fear lest the corruption of the dead bodies should imperil themselves than by any charity they had for the departed, to wit, that either with their own hands or with the aid of certain bearers, when as they might have any, they brought the bodies of those who had died forth of their houses, and laid them before the doors, where, especially in the morning, those who went about might see corpses without number. Then they fetched biers, and some, in default thereof, they laid upon some board or other. Nor was it only one bier that carried 2 or 3 corpses, nor did this happen but once. Nay, many might have been counted which contained husband and wife, 2 or 3 brothers, father and son, or the like, and an infinite number of times it befell that 2 priests going with 1 cross for some one, 3 or 4 biers borne by bearers, ranged themselves behind the latter. And whereas the priest thought to have but 1 dead man to bury, they had 6 or 8, and whiles more. Nor therefore were the dead honored with aught of tears or candles or funeral train. Nay, the thing was come to such a pass that folk recked no more of men that died than nowadays they would of goats, whereby it very manifestly appeared that which the natural course of things had not availed by dint of small and infrequent harms, to teach the wise to endure with patience the very greatness of their ills, had brought even the simple to expect and to make no account of. The consecrated ground sufficing not to the burial of the vast multitude of corpses aforesaid, which daily and well nigh hourly became carried in crowds to every church, especially if it were sought to give each his own place according to ancient usance. They were made throughout the churchyards, after every other part was full, vast trenches, wherein those who came after were laid by the hundred, and being heaped up therein by layers, as goods are stowed aboard ship, were covered with a little earth, till such time as they reached the top of the trench. Moreover, not to go longer searching out and recalling every particular of our past miseries, as they befell throughout the city, I say that whilst so sinister a time prevailed in the latter, on no wise therefore was the surrounding country spared, wherein letting be the castles which in their littleness were like unto the city, throughout the scattered villages and in the fields the poor and miserable husbandmen and their families, without succor of physician or aid of servitor, died, not like men, but well nigh like beasts, by the ways, or in their villages, or about the houses, indifferently by day and night, by reason whereof, growing lax like the townsfolk in their manners and customs, they recked not of anything or business of theirs, nay, all as if they looked for death that very day, studied with all their wit, not to help to maturity the future produce of their cattle and their fields, and the fruits of their own past toils, but to consume those which were ready to hand. Thus it came to pass that the oxen, the asses, the sheep, the goat, the swine, the fowls, nay, the very dogs, so faithful to mankind, being driven forth of their own houses, went straying at their pleasure about the fields, where the very corn was abandoned without being cut, much less gathered in, and many well nigh like reasonable creatures, after grazing all day, returned at night glutted to their houses without the constraint of any herdsman. To leave the country and return to the city, what more can be said, save that such and so great was the cruelty of heaven, and in part peradventure that of men, that between March and the following July, what with the virulence of that pestiferous sickness, and the number of sick folk ill-tended or forsaken in their need, through the fearfulness of those who were whole, it is believed for certain that upward of 100,000 human beings perished within the walls of the city of Florence, which peradventure before the advent of that death-dealing calamity had not been accounted to hold so many. Alas, how many great palaces, how many goodly houses, how many noble mansions, once full of families, of lords and of ladies, abode empty, even to the meanest servant. How many memorable families, how many ample heritages, how many famous fortunes were seen to remain without lawful heir. How many valiant men, how many fair ladies, how many sprightly youths, whom not others only but Galen, Hippocrates, or Aesculapius themselves would have judged most hale, breakfasted in the morning with their kinsfolk, comrades, and friends, and that same night supped with their ancestors in the other world. I am myself weary of going wandering so long among such miseries, wherefore purposing henceforth to leave such part thereof as I can fitly, I say that our city, being at this pass well nigh void of inhabitants, it chanced, as I afterward heard from a person worthy of credit, that there foregathered in the venerable church of Santa Maria Novella one Tuesday morning, when there was well nigh none else there, 7 young ladies, all knit one to the other by friendship or neighborhood or kinship, who had heard divine service and morning attire, as sorted with such a season. Not one of them had passed her 28th year, nor was less than 18 years old, and each was discreet and of noble blood, fair of favour and well-mannered, and full of honest sprightliness. The names of these ladies I would in proper terms set out, did not just cause forbid me, to wit, that I would not have it possible that in time to come any of them should take shame by reason of the things hereinafter related as being told or hearkened by them. The laws of disport being nowadays somewhat straitened, which at that time, for the reasons above shown, were the largest not only for persons in their years, but for those of a much riper age, nor yet would I give occasion to the envious, who are still ready to carp at every praiseworthy life, on any wise to disparage the fair fame of these honorable ladies with unseemly talk. Wherefore, so that which each saith may hereafterward be apprehended without confusion, I propose to denominate them by names altogether or in part, sorting with each one's quality. The first of them, and her of ripest age, I shall call Pampinea, the second Fiammetta, the third Philomena, and the fourth Emilia. To the fifth we will give the name of Loretta, to the sixth that of Nephila, and the last, and without cause, and not without cause, we will style Eliza. These then, not drawn of any set purpose, but foregathering by chance in the corner of the church, having seated themselves in a ring after diverse size, let be the saying of paternosters, and fell to devising with one another many and various things of the nature of the time. After a while, the others being silent, Pampinea proceeded to speak thus. Dear my ladies, you may, like myself, have many times heard that whoso honestly useth his right doth no one wrong. And it is the natural right of every one who is born here below to succor, keep, and defend his own life as best he may. And in so far as this is allowed, that it hath happened whiles that for the preservation thereof men have been slain without any fault, if this much be conceded of the laws, which have in view of the well-being of all mortals, how much more is it lawful for us, and whatsoever other, without offence unto any, to take such means as we may for the preservation of our lives. As often as I consider our fashions of this morning, and those of many other mornings past, and bethink me what and what manner discourses are ours, I feel, and you likewise must feel, that each of us is in fear for herself. Nor do I in any wise wonder at this, but I wonder exceedingly, considering that we all have a woman's wit, that we take no steps to provide ourselves against that which each of us is justly feareth. We abide here, to my seeming, no otherwise than as if we would or should be witness of how many dead bodies are brought hither for burial, or to hearken if the friars of the place, whose number is come well nigh to naught, chant their offices at the due hours or by our apparel, to show forth unto whosoever appeareth here the nature and extent of our distresses. If we depart hence, we either see dead bodies or sick persons carried about, or those whom for their misdeeds the authority of the public laws, while they are condemned to exile, overrun the whole place with unseemly excesses, as if scoffing at the laws, for that they know the executors thereof to be either dead or sick, whilst the dregs of our city, fattened with our blood, style themselves pickmen, and ruffle it everywhere in mockery of us, riding and running all about, and flouting us with our distresses and ribald songs. We hear nothing here but such an one is dead, or such an one is at the point of death, and were there any to make them, we should hear dolorous lamentations on all sides. And if we return to our houses, I know not if it is with you as with me, but for my part, when I find none left therein of a great household, save my serving maid, I wax fearful, and feel every hair of my body stand on end, and wherever I go or abide about the house, meseemeth I see the shades of those who are departed, and who wear not those countenances that I was used to see, but terrify me with horrid aspect, I know not whence newly come to them. By reason of these things, I feel myself alike ill at ease here and abroad. Ladies and gentlemen, I just realized my clock ran out. Yeah, so we've come to the ending of the next thrilling and exciting, astounding and amazing, ebullient and effervescent, ameliorated and castigated, reprehensible, irreparable, irreproachable, inimical episode of the fabulous reading cow from another world thing story show that this is, with our latest installment of the Decameron of Boccacio. Join us again next time when we continue the dolorous narrative of the plague. And until then, goodbye.